I'm Natalie Nidham, your host, and we are back with none other than Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who is on a mission to move the longevity conversation beyond weight and toward muscle. And not just how much muscle, but muscle quality. With training in geriatrics and nutritional sciences, she explains why intramuscular fat, that marbling that you look for in your steaks, is exactly not what you want in your own body. This is not about the number on the scale. This is what drives metabolic dysfunction and why there's really no such thing as a healthy sedentary person. We also talk about muscle's role in brain health and inflammation, and why building strength is one of the most powerful things you can do at any age. It's never too late, people. Never too soon and never too late. Now, this episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth, by Oslo, and by Trank Dart by Wizard Sciences, all with very special offers just for you, the listeners of this show. Check out the show notes below for details and enjoy the show. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, welcome to the show. It is an absolute pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, you know, you're one of those people. It's like, I got to get her on the show. We need to have that conversation. And you've just emerged as such an incredible beacon for women, and not just women, but muscle as the longevity, the organ of longevity, which I think is just the whole concept of it. I think when I first heard about it, I was like, you articulated something that maybe we all kind of deep down inside, as soon as you started articulating, it was like, yeah, it is. And we're going to dive into that. But before we do that, I want to just kind of go back a little bit. And you often describe your childhood and early years as unusually formative for how you see responsibility, grit, and personal agency. And so looking back, was there a moment when, you know, that most shaped your belief that discipline is a form of self-care and not a, you know, grit your teeth and get through it kind of thing?
I think that there wasn't any single moment. My sister and I, we were chatting. We were actually just recently on a podcast together. And we were talking about my dad used to take us on camping trips. And, you know, for most kids, like, oh, that's fun. But when I say camping trips, I'm talking about 13 milers where whatever you're going to have, you're going to pack it in there, you know, and I was
like real camping.
Yeah. 9. Yeah. And, you know, when things were too heavy for my sister, she would unload the backpack and I would pick up her stuff, and we would share and disperse the weight. And this was just part of our childhood, you know, being very physically active and understanding our surroundings. I would say that shaped me a lot.
Yeah.
I would say that shaped me a lot. And both, you know, my sister, she's actually a professor in criminology.
Whoa. Okay.
And she's a brown belt in Taekwondo and a state running champion.
Nice. Wow. Yeah. Well, but you know, but that's about doing hard things, right? Yeah. And I think one of the criticisms of childhood these days is there's maybe not enough hard stuff that's being put in front of kids when they're small. We're trying to protect them so much.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with you. And I would say that even in the conversation of doing hard things, it's not typically a female conversation, which by the way, women do a lot of hard things a lot of the time, and it's almost expected. And that's why, you know, maybe we don't think to say, you know, hey man, you've got 2 little kids, you're doing X, Y, and Z. That is way outside someone's comfort zone, as opposed to, you know, there's a whole other entity where people are like, oh, lean into the discomfort. And I'm thinking, I'm a mom of 2 little kids. My husband is in his second career in a urology residency. I'm already uncomfortable.
Oh yeah. Know? Yeah. I'm digging the discomfort.
Yeah.
Love it. So you trained under Dr. Donald Lehman, who is the world's leading protein scientist, and the protein wars continue to rage.
It's shocking.
It's shocking. But what drew you to him in the first place? Like, what was the thing?
Yeah. That's a good question. And Don still mentors me to this day. And I did my undergraduate in the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. And I think we've all had the experience when we're listening to someone talk and it's outside the norm. And you think, wow, this guy is an absolute genius. And that was him.
Yeah.
And I went to every office hour. I was a straight A student in his classes. And we just got to talking. And I was very interested in this idea of muscle and very interested in the idea and the role of protein and thinking about it differently and thinking about how muscle really shows us our health, right? Not just this training way, but how, say, a doctor looking at blood work would begin to think about muscle and what its role, its central role in metabolism is. And, 20 years later, he's still my best friend and mentor, which is wild to think about.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, that's a lifelong relationship, right? And you could have gone to door number 1 or door number 2. Door number 1, this guy's nuts. Nothing he says makes any sense. And door number 2 is this guy's brilliant. And in many ways, I would think that kind of shaped your trajectory.
No, it fully shaped my trajectory. And the other person, which maybe that's the person that introduced us, is, do you know Liz Lipsky, Dr. Liz Lipsky?
No, but I know the name.
So she's one of the OGs. She's one of the OG functional medicine doctors. She's a PhD and she's a nutritional scientist. Yeah. That's my godmother.
Oh, so this is in your DNA, sister.
Yeah.
This is not just.
There's door number 1, door number 2. It's kind of like, okay, here's the door you're going to be going through. And I happily
charged.
Happily charged. There was really no other way.
Yeah.
Truly. There was no other way. I feel a really big responsibility. I think that if someone has the knowledge, then they have a responsibility to share. And most people, I was just lucky to have really unique training. I did my fellowship at WashU in geriatrics and nutritional sciences. And that was really because Don said, if you want to do the kind of work that you want to do in the world, then you need to go and do a fellowship. And I think that there's a really heavy responsibility there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would imagine on the geriatrics and nutritional side, you would have witnessed the fallout of people not prioritizing. Like, do you think, I mean, I'm going off script here, but do you think as we're talking, I'm like, shouldn't muscular load assessment be part of a annual checkup?
Well, even beyond that, beyond muscular load, testing muscle, period. So I don't believe that body fat is as relevant as a biomarker as we make it, actually. Percent body fat, I think, is a secondary, it's almost a secondary outcome, but I think it's the percent of fat in skeletal muscle that actually drives chronic illness. And this came from another flash of insight I had when I was interviewing on my podcast a woman named Dr. Melanie Cree. She's an MD PhD. And I was like, Melanie, what percent body fat is the tipping point for those that struggle with fertility with PCOS versus those that don't? And she said, Gabrielle, it has nothing to do with body fat percentage. It has everything to do with intramuscular fat and how high their intramuscular fat was.
Wow. So be a filet, not a ribeye.
That's right. You've done your homework. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I love a good ribeye, but I'd rather eat it than be it. So, but that's interesting. So how does intramuscular fat, like, I don't think I've ever talked about that on the podcast before. Like, how does intramuscular fat, you would almost think that it's sequestered in the muscle and therefore not creating trouble.
Yeah.
What you're saying is it's playing a major role.
I believe that it is. I think that we're still too early in the research, and also we don't routinely measure it. But basically, sedentary muscle, there's no such thing as a healthy sedentary person.
Right.
And when muscle becomes sedentary, there's no flux, there's no exchange. And fat, we talk about visceral fat, and then we talk about fatty liver, but fatty muscle is a thing. And, whether it's liver is the first arrangement or muscle, but the primary site for disposal for all of these extra substrates, primarily carbohydrates, is muscle first. And then if the liver can't handle it, if the muscle can't handle it, then the liver has to deal with it. But the fat that gets infiltrated into skeletal muscle changes the morphology of muscle.
Right.
And it becomes less strong and fibrotic over time instead of this fillet. There's connective tissue changes, all kinds of things happen, and also metabolic changes.
Wow.
And that is not, if your body by percentage is 40% muscle, if 40% of your body weight is inflamed, you've got a problem.
Hey folks, I just wanted to throw a little message in here for those of you who are sending me all these incredible questions on social media or through YouTube or even on Spotify, wherever you're listening to the podcast. I wish I could get back to you, each one of you personally, but unfortunately I can't. And because I cannot, I created about a couple of years ago now, I created a membership community where I get to hang out with people just like you. I do live weekly Q&As, almost weekly anyway. We also do have podcast guests come in to answer everybody's questions and do presentations. You get to interact live with those podcast guests. We will sometimes do challenges with some of the partners. Like in 2026, we have a mitochondrial enhancement challenge coming up where we're going to be testing mitochondrial function. We're going to be testing people's deuterium levels. If you haven't heard about deuterium, we've got podcasts coming down the pipes on that. And then people will be invited to follow a personalized protocol and then retest their mitochondria on the other side. We offer that in the membership community, and we do it at incredible discounts that you just can't find anywhere else. So if you're interested in hanging out with me and other like-minded people, which actually happen to include some pretty awesome practitioners and even some previous podcast guests who've come and joined the community, then I invite you to check it out on my website, natnidham.com/the-longevity-community, or just go to natnidham.com and look for the longevity community tab at the top of the page. Click on that and see if this is right for you. I would love to see you there. And we could make 2026 our best year ever together. So once again, that's natnidham.com. Just look for the longevity community tab at the top of the page. Now let's get back to the show. What's a belief that you held earlier in your medical career that you've now come around to, oh boy?
I say this with some level of difficulty. So number one, that body fat, one couldn't have obesity and be fit. So that was wrong. And again, this intramuscular adipose tissue, you can reduce it by the simple act of training, whether body composition changes or not. That's very empowering. This idea that just the simple act of doing some kind of physical activity changes things, regardless of outcome, is important. The other thing was, animal and plant proteins. I was convinced that you couldn't build muscle on plant protein, and that's not true.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Tell me.
But it's still not a prime. I still don't. Again, it's not just a protein conversation. It's what about B12? What about B6? What about the protein matrix? It's not just here, drink your protein as this obscure kind of solution. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's why EAAs will never really replace full food protein.
That's right. But essential amino acids, which is a really good point, we recommend them. So especially now with the use of GLP-1s, essential amino acids, EAAs, seem to be much more valuable, at least in our clinic, because the overall hunger and consumption is down. Yeah. And if you're eating 2 ounces of fish, you're going to get, 10 grams of protein or whatever. Then adding EAAs, essential amino acids, with that meal will signal to the body that it's a higher protein meal. So that's where it can be very valuable. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a huge fan of EAAs for GLP-1 use, and we're going to get to GLP-1s in a bit. So, because I think that at this point, you can't have a conversation without talking about the GLPs and understanding the nuances. And I love your approach. I've heard it, and I think there's 2 camps in the world right now, and hopefully the nuance camp is growing at the expense of the naysayers. So you've said that modern sedentary behavior, it's not just not moving enough, it's actually a disease state. Yeah. And you were alluding to that earlier when you were just talking about the marbling that happens in muscle. Yeah. So physiologically, what does inactivity actually do to the body that most people and even most clinicians really underestimate or don't see? There's a handful of things. And I did my training in geriatrics, and this is very underappreciated, is the simple act of contracting skeletal muscle. And when I say skeletal muscle, I'm talking about the muscles under voluntary control.
Yeah.
There's smooth muscle and there's cardiac muscle, but skeletal muscle is the only organ system that we have voluntary control over. And most people recognize the importance of muscle for strength and mobility, all of this other stuff. I think there's two areas where it's extremely underappreciated. Number one, its role in metabolism. And I'm not talking about that it is a very metabolically active tissue. It's quite frankly, it's not. That is a huge misconception. At rest, the body, you're talking about just a few calories that resting skeletal muscle burns.
Okay.
It doesn't burn a lot. When it burns a lot is when you're using it in activity. So that is a very big misconception. But something that I don't think that people appreciate is this contractile tissue, that skeletal muscle is an endocrine organ. So it acts, when you contract it, it secretes myokines, or, these hormones that act both locally on the tissue itself, systemically, and, on various other tissues, and in particular, the brain. Mm-hmm. When you contract, whether you get stronger or not, right? There's, over 1,000 myokines, but the simple act of contracting skeletal muscle increases your cognitive abilities, whether it's executive function, whether it's working memory. And another aspect to that is the faster you move physically, the faster you think. It improves cognitive processing speed.
That's amazing. Well, I think we see it, and you see it in kids, right? Kids who are athletes in school very often are high performers academically.
The idea, it's so funny you say that. I'm working on a talk that I'm giving on Monday.
Yeah.
And the idea of dumb jock, I have no idea
right?
Because technically those people are the smartest.
Yeah.
If leg strength is an indication of, if improved leg strength is, in essence, goes with stronger cognition, these guys are geniuses.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think where the dumb jock comes from maybe is the occasional person you'll come across, or kid who you'll come across, who maybe has been told they're not smart and they excel at sports. And so they just lean into that thing that they're good at. And then they get sold a story, and kids will kind of buy it when you say it to them often enough. So anyway, I'm sure that talk will be fascinating. Okay, so where do you see the research heading next on skeletal muscle functioning like an endocrine organ? And I think you touched on it a minute ago, especially regarding cognition, neuroprotection, and mood regulation. So you're touching on it already. So just the mere act of contracting a muscle is going to feed the brain. So maybe let's kind of dive into that a little bit.
Well, I think your question is a really good one. Your question of where do I think that the field is going when it comes to skeletal muscle? I'm going to tell you exactly where I think it's going, because I think we're at the beginning of it. We're not, I don't even think that we're at the beginning of it. There's going to be a number of things that are going to be very uncomfortable for people to hear. The use of anabolic agents are going to be important. And anabolic agents are, you're talking about testosterone, but there are other anabolic agents that are going to be critical for muscle, because it's not just the increase in androgenic activity, but there's going to be an increase or a need. Again, if we're talking about optimal health, for anabolic activity, we're talking about anabolic agents, myostatin inhibitors. So there's going to be, what I believe, again, I believe this, is there has to be more interest in that, without a shadow of a doubt. And there's so much stigma around hormones and anabolic agents that I don't know how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
Quite frankly. But I think it's the most important aspect. It's one of the most important tools that we have to address muscle health. There's another component that I think is underappreciated, that I don't even think we have enough data. There's two other components. Number one, actually testing for the quality of muscle and imaging muscle like the way that we image fat. We're not there, and it's not routinely used, and it's critical. We have to get a better understanding, and it has to be more mainstream. And then the final part is using technology. For example, radio frequency and other technology that allows for super physiological contractions. And why do I say that? People can go and do a squat and I could do 10 reps of a squat, and you could do 10 reps of a squat, and my husband, who's highly trained, could do 10 reps of a squat. But we are all stimulating tissue differently, and it's much different than nutritional sciences. Mm-hmm. So for example, for nutritional sciences, we pretty much have an idea, and we can calculate how much glucose someone can dispose of in a 2-hour period.
Right.
And we've done those calculations. But for training and muscle stimulation, there's so many other components. There's so much genetic variability, and there's so much training variability that is going to require some kind of standardization, especially with the use of GLP-1s. If we flip on its head that body fat doesn't really matter and skeletal muscle is the organ system that really matters, we are so far behind where we need to be.
Yeah.
So I think things like there's machines like M-Sculpt, which has a terrible name. Terrible. I mean, terrible. The idea that we need to sculpt our body is absolutely the wrong thing. But what's fascinating is that these machines allow for increasing muscle mass.
Yeah. So it's by increasing the recruitment of muscle fibers, right?
Yes. It's the stimulation.
And stimulation,
it's like neurosignaling. And again, I think that the ability to contract and the signal goes down a bit, and we really need to streamline that and standardize it. And that's what I think is going to change everything.
Yeah. I actually just acquired a suit, like an electrical muscle stim suit. And it's changed how I feel about my workouts completely. It's really interesting. I mean, I'm in beginning stages, but it's a whole different experience because you have muscular contraction happening even without doing anything. But then when you start using your body, it just goes so much deeper. It's just a really, but you do feel more depleted on the other side. Like, I think that now that, as we get into these technologies and they evolve, and maybe this is where what you're talking about, maybe the anabolic conversation is part of that as well, is that number one, you have to feed the gains, you have to feed the depletion, you have to replete what you've used up. But these anabolic agents, I want to go back to those because I think it's so interesting you bring that up, because obviously they've gotten a bad name because they've been overused and misused forever. But in an aging population, used in a different way with nuance is going to be a whole new world. Like, I've heard that our satellite cells just kind of, they just don't work properly when we get older. And those are the cells that are responsible for generating new muscle fibers. I mean, I butchered that explanation, but
no, actually, I think you bring up this a wonderful point. Yes, satellite cells become a bit dysregulated. The immune cells within muscle tissue become dysregulated. There's all kinds of things that happen. And anabolic agents, again, it's a very uncomfortable conversation, frankly, for me to have, but I know that it's the future. Yeah. And it's kind of like, they took the FDA black box warning off of hormones for women. They're probably going to do the same for testosterone. Yes, but that is now just happening. Yeah. Anabolic agents, that's not even entered the conversation. No. There's anabolic agents that are used for burn victims, for anemia, FDA approved for anemia of chronic disease, osteoporosis. But I just think that if we were to get very real, if we really recognize muscle as this organ of longevity, we have to recognize that there are medications that improve its tissue. And I'm going to tell you something else. Now, just take a moment and think about this. People can go to their doctor and say, I want a medication that is going to help me lose body fat. Yeah. The doctor doesn't think anything about it. Yeah. If a patient goes in and say, I want a medication that's going to make me build muscle. It's like, oh my gosh, you can't do that. It's insane. Yeah. So where it cognitively makes absolutely no sense from my perspective. And I'm hoping the clinicians listening to this podcast also agree. It makes absolutely no sense.
I was having this conversation recently with someone and I said, this obsession with losing fat is like, if you've ever taken an advanced driving course, they're teaching you about how to take a hairpin turn. They're telling you, don't look at the wall.
Because if you look at the wall, that's exactly where you're going. And this obsession with losing fat is missing the point of, if we were instead obsessed with building muscle, we would lose the fat that we needed to lose. And you would end up with the muscle that you need to keep the fat away. Like it's almost like semantics, but it's putting the emphasis on a different point. And I want to get to the part where we're going to talk about GLPs, because I still think they can play a role in this increasing muscle mass if they're used properly, because the mechanism of action is there. It's just that we're not feeding it properly. But before we go there, I want to go back to this idea of brain power, how resistance training improves brain power. This is still very shocking to people, right? You try to say this to someone and they're like blank.
It seems so surprising because the majority of the brain, I think probably 30% of the brain, is all designed for movement. Remember, we were taught the homunculus.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating that we're always looking for hacks and shortcuts, but the biggest hack and shortcut would be something strong.
Yeah. So let's help people understand, like mechanistically, what are the pathways that are feeding back from the muscle to the brain?
Well, it's really through this myokine pathway is really what they believe to be the primary from a mechanistic perspective. And actually, it's so funny that you say that. I will tell you exactly some of the most up-to-date data that I have been looking at, which is, let's see if I can pull that up. That would be so awesome. I wonder if it didn't transfer over. Hold on. So one of there's a handful of big ways, and then I'll get into some of the nuances. In the contractile tissue from, let's see, just give me 1 second. I'm so excited to be able to share this.
I'm so excited you're pulling stuff up on your computer.
I'm so very excited. I just
hot
have
off the press, guys.
Yeah. I was just looking at some of the recent meta-analysis with this. So it's like very exciting if I can pull it up. Hold on, give me just a minute. And I'm sure your team can edit out this slight delay. Just close this. Okay. Oh yeah. I was just looking at all this. Okay. The myokine conversation. Oh gosh. All right. Well, yes. Okay. Found it. So let's talk about first that there's different training modalities. There's resistance training, and then there's this physical mental training, right? Like if we work on balance or whatever, and then there's aerobic. Resistance training in particular, which obviously is my first love, seems to affect the brain different. And we just have to recognize that these are very highly complicated processes, right? There's the default mode network, there's various parts of the brain, there's all these different things. But for example, like high intensity interval training, there's there's roughly 5 different mechanisms that pretty much we believe is the reason why it works. Number 1, this myokine production. Contracting muscle based on the duration and intensity releases myokines. That there's a whole host. So BDNF is probably the most popular, but there's cathepsin B, there's all kinds. Cathepsin B crosses the blood-brain barrier and helps promote neurogenesis and BDNF release. Again, this is just one. It improves both peripheral blood flow and cerebral blood flow.
Yeah.
Which we know, then there is also an enhancement in the mitochondrial function, depending on how you're training, whether it's HIIT or resistance training. And then what I thought was really fascinating is that it preserves structural brain function. And I'm not going to mess with my computer, but there was one study that I was looking at, particularly in women, in postmenopausal women, that resistance training helped decrease the risk of atrophy. So brain atrophy, the shrinking of white matter. Yeah. And so these are really the ways in which, these are a handful of ways in which is pretty well established. I will also say one other thing. These are mechanisms. How these mechanisms then translate over to humans, we haven't really been able to say, okay, well, this myokine we know primarily does this. Right. I mean, it's out there in the literature, but I think that it's still not, it's not as black and white, you know? there's an amazing researcher. So many years ago, there's a woman named Bente Pedersen, and she is the one that really discovered this. She's an immunologist. And so there's theory, and then there's that practical aspect of, is it really doing what we think? And I think that there are still some questions, but these are some of the main ways that we believe that it works.
Yeah, it's funny, like listening to you speaking about this, you can really feel that what you were saying earlier, that we're so behind on understanding muscle outside of it makes us stronger. Beyond muscle as a physical thing, this whole idea of muscle as a longevity organ, and when people say that, it's like, yeah, it's so that I can walk around and do what I want. But it's really so much more than that. It's what you're talking about, regulating inflammation, the immune system, the brain, like it's a major player in the whole body.
And what makes it the most powerful, it's the only one we have voluntary control over.
Right.
It's the only one. So essentially it's a choice.
Yeah. Is it ever too late?
No, it's never too late.
Yeah. I mean, I want people to hear that right now, because if you're 70 years old and you haven't seen the inside of a gym or lifted anything beyond a can of whatever, it's not too late for you to get out there and start doing things.
I think that's really profound, because there is always an ability to get stronger. And that's critical. It's critical to believe that we can. And, one of the things, again, I'm still practicing, and, in our clinic is called Strong Medical, which is kind of cool.
Love it.
But yeah, kind of cool.
As it should be.
But the idea that we are limited by age is not true. And, you can always get stronger, and there's really only one way to not do it well or at all. And that's just to not do it. People, there is very little barrier to entry. And I think that people have to take it very seriously. And this is a problem, is because there's voluntary choice, people sometimes make a choice to not include it. And that's a problem.
Well, and there's so many barriers, mental barriers to it. And I don't want to get into it, even because I think that there's so many more interesting things we could be talking about, but the message to the audience that it's never too late. And even if you don't have anabolic agents, even if, your satellite cells aren't working as well. And I would think that for a person who's sedentary, the growth curve is pretty vertical, at least in the initial stages of training. Like how different you'll feel and the progress you'll make will be dramatic.
There is an adaptation process that happens. The first process is a neuromuscular. It's more of a neural process. And then you build strength. And also training is a skill. Muscular movement is a skill that we have to become good at. And I will say, even if we are driving toward an outcome of strength, mobility, flexibility, the simple act of doing the activity improves your health.
Yeah.
And it empties the tank. It uses glycogen. It increases these myokines. It does all kinds of things that are critical for our survival,
Absolutely. When you talk about myostatin inhibitors, what are your thoughts? I just thought I'd throw this in there because you brought up myostatin. What are your thoughts on there's some gene therapies out there right now, like the follistatin?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I don't have enough data to make a scientific thought, but I can tell you my personal thought.
Sure.
I think that there could be benefit, especially if someone is older. It seems that it's very easy to turn off the gene therapy. I personally don't necessarily see any problem with it.
Yeah.
But again, that is not a scientific recommendation. That's just a personal.
Yeah, I was just asking for your personal thought, and you're better educated than most to give your personal thought. So I think
it's the way of the future, and that we have to figure out ways to improve and maintain meaningful muscle.
Yeah.
We have to.
I think what I've seen in the people I've known to do it is the people who do the best are the people who move. It's the people who don't somehow buy this this storyline that you're going to do a gene therapy and then you don't have to do much and things will change. It's like anything else. But I think over time we'll find that the people who lean in and now take this as an opportunity to do the physical, to put in the physical effort are going to reap the biggest benefits. But to your point, it's still early days. So one thing before we move on to GLP-1s is this whole issue of, you've said that brain fog is not always neurological.
No, I mean, there's a million different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the patterns you're seeing that in patients that really connect the muscle tissue to this whole impaired executive function?
Well, I would say that there's a number of things. And, definitely hormones can play a role. But the other thing that we see, and this isn't necessarily related to training, but environmental exposures play a huge role. Again, this is what we're seeing in our clinic.
Yeah.
Environmental exposures play what we seem to believe to be a huge role in cognitive function. Because if the environmental toxin load is so high, again, this is very gray water here. This is not evidence-based. In these moments because no one can agree. The environmental medicine doctors don't agree and whatever. But the environmental impact seems to be a huge, and when I say environmental, I mean mold exposure.
Yeah.
I mean air quality. Like those are huge problems.
I think that as the further we go, every single physician I talk to, and it doesn't matter what the topic is bringing up this idea of toxic load in the body. And I don't think it's rocket science. It'll be great when we can quantify it and have more data, if you will, but it doesn't, if the body's filled with toxins, it's filled with garbage, the system's not going to be able to function properly.
Yeah.
That's just not, do you think that exercise, but I feel like exercise is in a small way, a way to detox or a way to improve the body's ability to clear?
I think if we were to break this down, I'll give you my thoughts. Training is important for a number of reasons. So we've talked about it in improving cerebral blood flow and helping with mitochondrial function and improving myokine production. All those things are meaningful. But the other aspect of sweating is also a way to improve the detoxification system. Another thing that I think is really underappreciated is that as individuals get older, their glutathione production goes down.
Yes.
And this is where dietary protein comes in, because we're not eating for protein, we're eating for these amino acids. And so, for example, methionine and cysteine are precursors for glutathione, and the production of glutathione as the master antioxidant does decrease. And so there are ways that, and why do I tie this into muscle is because, obviously muscle is stimulated by protein, and those choices are, if we're eating for healthy brain function, whatever is good for muscle seems to be good for brain.
Yeah. Yeah. So, no, 100%. You had said earlier that your belief that you can't build muscle without animal protein has been challenged. But I would say that it's a lot more work. Would you agree with that?
I think that, and this data is really the younger generation. So 25-year-old men looking at plant protein and animal protein seem to make the same gains.
Yeah, they're 25-year-old men.
Yeah, I know. So again, that's really kind of great for everybody. But the reality is that, so if we were to then take the randomized control trials and then put it into practice, into real life, which is not actually how things are designed to do, most aging women are not eating much. Right. And they're probably not even hitting 1,500 calories. And so if you are going to be consuming a high amount of plant protein, we know because of its bioavailability, you're probably going to have to be consuming 35% more total calories.
Right. And the right ones.
With that comes carbohydrates. And, if you're not active and don't have a ton of muscle, then you begin to distort metabolism. Yeah. So that is, I don't want people to think that, in my opinion, plant protein is not the way to go because we already have nutrients at risk, especially for an aging population, zinc, selenium, all these nutrients that ride along with complex protein sources.
Mm-hmm.
Plants are great. Plants are great for fiber and phytonutrients and all this other stuff. But when we're talking about protein, I think it's a luxury to be able to have access to the kind of food that we have.
Yeah, no, I agree with that also.
So I can't believe people are still fighting over it.
Well,
it was really interesting. I saw a screenshot. I don't actually go on social media much. I don't consume much of it. And I looked at this, someone tagged me and Peter Attia in something, and I sent it over to Don Lehman, and it was really funny. And he said, I've published 3 randomized controlled trials that say the opposite. Someone was saying that higher protein diets are bad for people over the age of 55. And he said, oh yeah, well, I've published 3 trials talking about this. I was like, okay.
The post I saw was between the ages of, I think it was 50 to 65, that excess protein would overdrive mTOR and increase the risk of cancer.
It's so old school. Like, I don't know who even believes that. It's crazy that it's still out there.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, this whole toggle between mTOR and AMPK is really interesting, right? But are you of the opinion also that every once in a while you do need to go AMPK dominant just to allow the body to clean things up? And by once in a while, I'm thinking it could be once a week. Like, I'm not saying like for a month or 2 months, but
I think we have to get really clear on, so mTOR is mammalian target of rapamycin, or depending on when you studied it, mechanistic target of rapamycin. And it's in every tissue. It is a driver for growth in every tissue. It is sensitive to different substrates, more primarily in various tissues.
Okay.
In skeletal muscle, mTOR is exquisitely sensitive to leucine and amino acids.
Mm-hmm.
The pancreas and the liver and all these other organs are more sensitive to insulin and carbohydrates and excess energy. So why do we care about mTOR? mTOR, again, is this cascade, this protein complex. There's a cascade for muscle protein synthesis. So if we believe that mTOR stimulation is bad in muscle because of protein, because that's where it's sensitive to, then we would also believe that resistance training and exercise would be bad, because that also stimulates mTOR in the same robust way.
Right.
And so the idea that mTOR somehow drives cancer and it's related to protein is incorrect. Mm-hmm. What's more detrimental is overall total calories, particularly excess consumption of carbohydrates, which drive mTOR in all the other tissues.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Tissue specific.
Okay.
And that seems to be completely missed. It's tissue specific.
Yeah, no, that's actually really interesting. So I think that the idea, though, was not so much that mTOR is bad, but more that if that's all we ever think about and never take the foot off the pedal, that maybe there could be value in periodically fasting or, just changing things up a little bit just to
probably. But I don't know if I would think about it in that way.
Okay.
So chronically elevated mTOR is not good. And the way someone would chronically elevate mTOR would be small, high carbohydrate meals throughout the day. That is not a good idea.
Okay.
But having discrete meals with protein will stimulate mTOR, probably lasts. We don't totally know. It might last for 5 hours. There's other EIF4, other, there's initiation factors. There's other factors that are also stimulated, which is why you shouldn't do small protein feedings throughout the day either. I don't agree with that. You should eat protein in discrete meals.
So like a bolus, like a big, yeah.
And then you go through periods of time where your foot is off the pedal. But again, there's speculation, and then there is what does the data show? Mm-hmm. And would long periods of fasting or decreasing mTOR, mTOR is, you want it on and then you want it off. But I also don't know, if you look at some of Blake Rasmussen's work, I don't know if it's ever off, right? It seems to, right. So again, I don't know if it's the dietary component that we push our foot on. But I will say small carbohydrate heavy meals throughout the day is not good.
Yeah. I mean, this whole idea of grazing all day long, not a good idea in general. You're never taking a break. Okay, let's get into GLPs, because GLPs are, the molecule of the decade at this point. I think they're not about to leave the news anytime soon. So you've spoken very candidly about prescribing GLP-1s when appropriate, but also about this looming crisis of sarcopenic obesity, which let's define for the audience what sarcopenic is the big word, obesity, everybody knows. So what signs do you look for when you're deciding who's metabolically resilient enough to safely use these meds? Number one,
I believe that everyone should have a choice, that people should have a choice. It is their body. Prescribing, there has to be a reason and there has to be safety involved. I think that, again, it depends on what the person needs and wants. For example, let's say a person has been trying to lose 10 pounds for 20 years. Mm-hmm. They're not grossly overweight, but that 10 pounds has been creating quite a bit of cognitive distress. Mm-hmm. Then, why would I not be able to say, here, as a physician, we'll provide a microdose to see if that doesn't seem to help lower some inflammation, see if that improves your hunger levels, etc. So I think that there is a personal choice perspective of, for the patient and obviously the provider safety. But I think that that's the biggest thing. And then evaluating, does this person have the right habits to maintain muscle? Because the average person stays on a GLP-1 2 years. And then when they come off of that, what happens?
What's left?
Now they've lost a large amount of muscle. And then where are they?
So what are people, and I mean, when I first learned about GLPs, what I learned is that they improve the expression of GLUT4 receptors at skeletal muscle. So that means, in plain English, that your skeletal muscle is better able to grab glucose out of blood and use it for energy. So that should mean, ergo, that it's easier to exercise, and we should be able to, if we're using them properly and exercising, that should make it easier to build muscle.
I think that there is going to be emerging data that there are positive effects on skeletal muscle and GLP-1s as opposed to the negative, where people are saying it causes a decrease in muscle and it accelerates muscle loss. We don't see data like that. Do I think that it improves GLUT4 receptors in a meaningful way? I'm not sure. But where I do think that we are also going to see effect is that it decreases intramuscular adipose tissue.
It does.
And we know that intramuscular adipose tissue is a problem.
Right.
And that's where I think we're going to start to really see good positive changes, which is one of the reasons why it potentially improves fertility.
Right. Because you talked about PCOS and intramuscular fat earlier.
Yeah.
Interesting. So for someone who's losing weight fast on GLPs, because this is probably someone who has a lot of weight to lose, right? How do you help them assess whether they're losing the right weight? Because even when you talked earlier about the woman or the person, I don't know if you said woman specifically, but someone who's been struggling with the same 10 pounds for years. And, it brings to mind postmenopausal women, right? Postmenopausal women, they wake up one morning and there's 10 pounds that have moved in that wasn't there before and for seemingly no reason. And I think one of the things that we forget is they may only look like they've gained 10 pounds, but if they haven't been exercising, they actually may have swapped out a whole lot of muscle for fat.
Yeah. And that's really this idea of sarcopenic obesity, is that the weight stays the same, but the body composition changes.
Yeah.
And this is something that we see definitely in aging, is that muscle loss increases and fat mass increases. So lower muscle mass, higher body fat.
Yeah. And the solution for that is pretty basic. Resistance, exercise, move. It's not that simple, but
I struggle with it because, again, we worked on some of the early studies before it was really a thing in 2000 and when was it? God, it was a long time ago. when we shifted from the food guide pyramid to a 1.6 gram per kg protein in the diet, making breakfast a robust amount of protein, those patients lost less muscle mass and less, actually it was lean tissue, because it's hard. The loss is very subtle, right? So if you think about sarcopenia, it's 10% per 10 years, per decade. The DEXA changes are not that sensitive. So the skeletal muscle gain and loss, it's not very sensitive. Especially it's not very sensitive inter-individual.
Right.
It's difficult to pick that up. So, you know, is it enough to improve muscle health? It is. But then the question becomes, what would be optimal? And will we ever be in a position where, you know, people are getting enough training to be optimized? And that's where I think that things like these machines and radio frequency can really come into play. And again, I'm not talking about just good health. I'm talking about how do we move people to optimal? We don't even have a number for optimal muscle mass.
No.
We have numbers for percentage of body fat, but we don't, you know, we don't have a number for where someone should be.
Right.
You know, like based on your body, should your percent muscle mass be 55%? Should it, you know, we don't know.
What about genetic variations in that space? Because some people build muscle a whole lot easier than others. I mean,
That's right.
And does that mean that you're built to carry less muscle, or does that just mean you're at a disadvantage?
I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
And I also think it comes down to fiber types. So there's primary fiber types, type 1, type 2, and obviously there's type 2X, and there's these hybrid fiber types. But, you know, type 1 fibers, people are better at endurance, type 2 fibers. And again, you can train all of this. There's probably a proclivity to certain things. And I think they're all really good questions. I think that we know a lot about muscle when it comes to sport and performance, and way less when it comes to health and wellness.
Yeah.
You know, like the immune impact on, you know, you can get an autoimmune disease of skeletal muscle. It's not very common. No one talks about that.
Oh my
Talk
God.
about thyroid all the time.
What a nightmare.
Right? We're checking it.
Yeah.
And again, I just think that there's so much related to muscle and where we're going that it is, you know, the most important frontier, especially with the increased use of GLP-1s.
Yeah. So going back to that. So if you had to design a non-negotiable muscle first protocol for anyone considering a GLP-1, what would the essential anchors be, and where do most patients just fall?
Yes. Well, that's exactly why I wrote the playbook. So my first book, Forever Strong, was this manifesto, and it really talked about the foundational science. But the Forever Strong playbook comes out January 27th. And this is all protocol driven. It's written for providers as well as patients alike. And it shows you exactly what you need to do.
Love it.
It has a how to think, how to eat, how to move. It has a basic training program. It is the book that I wish that I had. And so that's why I wrote it.
Nice.
So it covers nutrition, right? That's a non-negotiable, how you're going to design a diet. Dietary protein is your first decision. You have to be creating enough stimulus. It's not about progressive overload. It's about progressive stimulus. There's many ways to improve because, again, your muscle strength and ability will outpace your tendons. And the last thing that you want to do is get injured. So we put in a protocol for prehab and a protocol for training so that people can then take that forward. And then, you know, you do have to have a how to think section. I mean, people have 1 million health books on their shelves. What's the difference between being able to be discerning and take the next right action? And I think that has to be addressed. The non-negotiables are get your nutrition right. You have to train. You have to be thinking right. And then ultimately you have to recover because that's where muscle and that's where, you know, this recalibration happens.
It's like the world needs a rethink on exercise and muscle. It'll be interesting to see as we move forward. Even it has to be, you know, when you think about what you brought up first when we started the conversation about going camping with your dad and you as a 9-year-old with your sister figuring out how to distribute the load so that not your father saying, it's okay, I'll carry your packs, you guys just come along. But the two of you sitting there figuring it out and that building into you, both of you, this ability and openness to doing work, even when it's hard, it's like that almost has to be brought back into schools. Because like we're losing it with little kids in school. Gym programs are getting canceled all over the place, and it's being left up to parents to figure out the sports piece for their kids, which is a battle because of screens and whatnot. But building that in, it's like good food, building it in when they're kids and not waiting till they're 30 years old and inflamed and miserable to try and figure it out then.
Yeah, I think that, when we think about setting our youth up and setting standards for them, we're not raising children, we're really raising adults.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's extremely valuable, because think about all the habits that you and I had to unlearn and undo. It takes like 20 years to figure that out. Mm-hmm. Why not at least take the physical piece off and give them a framework for mental strength and also physical strength? And if they decide they don't want to do it, fine. But as opposed to the opposite, making them have to come into good habits that we know are good for them. So we're raising adults. We're not raising kids.
Yeah, no, it's a great perspective. And the piece of mental strength is very important too, because if we only think about physical strength without the mental strength piece, the physical strength doesn't happen. And frankly, I think they come hand in hand. It's
definitely a bi-directional relationship.
Yeah, you can't do one without the other. Okay, let's jump along here. Can you walk us through a little bit of your growth zone framework? Basically, this is about what are the core psychological shifts that allow someone to see stress as fuel rather than something to escape, right? So this is still in this whole mindset world. And how do we frame, for example, a tough workout as an amazing thing, as opposed to, oh God, I just need to get through this?
Yeah, no. So when you think about building capacity, that's what you asked me, right?
It's just basically helping people to understand, like, what's that psychological shift that we need to make so that we can see stress as a good thing. I mean, just reframing. And in this case,
before that, you have to understand why it even matters to you.
Yeah,
so
sure.
If you feel good being comfortable and in the status quo, in your status quo, that's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And then, just be very aware is, do you feel like you're going to wake up with regret one day? Is there this quiet voice that says, you could be working or doing something a little bit more challenging and just fulfilling your own potential. So I think that, asking really real questions. I mean, I ask questions of myself all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm constantly challenging myself. It's, could this be done better? Where am I really at with this? And you have to be able to understand your why as to why you are doing something.
Yeah.
And get really clear. As I'm looking at this playbook, what do I think is a really big, important component to understand? There is a capacity. There's this idea that there's really these 4 quadrants. So there's where we are in a growth zone. And so this is the level of challenge meets your level of capacity. And this is where you're always feeling just a little bit uncomfortable. Yep. But you can meet the challenge. This is what you do. You were designed for it. And then there's someone who has really high capacity, but their level of challenge is, say, lower by choice. So they have high capacity, but the level of challenge is like 50%. Mm-hmm. And this is where you're kind of in recovery. Recovery is like this recovery zone. And then there's the stagnation zone. And this is the worst place to be. People go here often when they're in limbo. Mm-hmm. It's the level of challenge is really low and your capacity usage is really low. And this is really the worst place to be. It's like this lower left-hand corner. And it's where you're just on autopilot. And I think that it's a slow death on autopilot. And then, of course, if the level of challenge is too high and your capacity is too low, this is kind of burnout and breakdown.
Yeah, that's all the people going back to the gym in January for the first week and then falling apart at the seams.
But, you got to
They
expect that
disappear.
it's going to be challenging.
Yeah. No, but you know what I mean? Like they go in there all guns blazing with crazy expectations, and they get super sore, or they get injured, or whatever the case may be. And then you never see them again. I mean, I used to be a fitness instructor, and I saw it every year, September and January. People would come in and they're so keen, and then they just disappear. And very often it's outstripping their capacity and just getting frustrated and feeling like, I just can't do this. So getting into that place where you're slightly uncomfortable, you're challenging yourself, but you're also able to pick yourself up the next day and move on.
Yeah. And also just side note, soreness doesn't necessarily mean you had a good workout, right? Soreness can be a number of things. It's not an indicator. It's not the end result. That's not the end goal.
Yeah.
Right. People will be like, oh, I'm sore, I'm going to stop. Okay. It's like good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah. Well, whereas other people are like, if I didn't get sore after that workout, clearly I didn't work hard enough. And
right. That's not the way we want to think about it.
No, that's back to the no pain, no gain old school of thought. So maybe let's talk a little bit about the line, and that feeds into this a little bit, the whole line between overwork and discipline. And we see this a lot in high-powered executives. So people who, just don't cut themselves any slack. People who are just like, if I'm not moving, then I'm not doing anything. And you just mentioned recovery a couple of times, and which is, I think, one of the big mistakes that people make with training is they forget to take a day off or 2 days off, or what are we doing on those days off?
It's a hard lesson to learn, by the way.
Yeah.
So is your question, what is the fine line?
How do you tell the difference in your body between, you want to be like we just said it, you want to push yourself into at least some discomfort, but how do you know when you're going too far? How do we help people make that discern between those two things?
This is personal for everybody, right? And I used to think that I wasn't doing well if I wasn't just grinding myself to the bone. And I think it shows up in different ways for different people, but you have to get really clear with yourself. Are you burned out? Are your skills kind of, you're not living up to what you know that you could be? Meaning, let's say you go and you give a talk or you do a thing and you're not able to do it really well, and you're probably overreaching.
Yeah.
It's a very personal thing. Yeah.
And I think it's the signs of you're not recovering. I mean, if we take it down to the physical, you're getting sick. You're getting weaker instead of stronger. It's that kind of like those obvious markers that, and I had a friend who was at the gym every day, 7 days a week, and I could see him coming apart at the seams. But, what was interesting for this person is it was his way of managing his mental health. And he couldn't envision a day where he didn't go to the gym.
Yeah. And that's, there's other ways, like going to a cold plunge or whatever, but again, if the overall objective is growth is not, it's not linear.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's helping people to understand that for sure. How early in life do you think we can we can kind of see the trajectory of someone who will become sarcopenic? Like, can you see it early on, or is it something that can just set in? Like,
that's a great question. I don't think anyone has ever asked me that. I don't think that we totally know. Man, that's a really great question. It's a hard one, but what we do know is that when individuals train early, because again, first of all, it's never too late. But if we were to say, okay, how are we going to protect people from sarcopenia? Training early enough where you're priming these satellite cells and these myonuclei is really what we want to be thinking. Yeah. So there's no way to tell for sure, because again, there's autoimmune disease of skeletal muscle, all kinds of things. But if we were to flip that, how do we know or give people the best ability to protect themselves? It's train early.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's instilling it in kids, right? It's also builds the habit.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of what you do.
There's been a lot of talk about, kids shouldn't lift weights. I totally disagree.
Which one? Sorry.
Kids shouldn't lift weights. I totally disagree.
Oh, let's talk about that. That's interesting. I actually saw a 9-year-old doing crazy stuff with a barbell.
And I'm not talking about that, but you know, my kids are lifting. There's no reason why a child shouldn't. It's not going to affect growth plates. It's, you know, we're not talking about 1 rep maxes. We're talking about how do we begin to prime the skeletal muscle to do what it needs to do. And the way to do that is to do it young. Again, I think it's a really good question. How do we, you know, we know what someone does to kind of set themselves up for heart disease. We don't know completely. But, you know, I'm guessing, again, what's good for muscle is good for brain, is good for all of these things. I think that's where training really comes in.
Well, we talk about how disease takes decades to build. Like, you don't wake up one morning diabetic. You don't wake up one morning with heart disease. It's been building and building and building. And I think it then follows that if you're not laying down that muscle foundation early in the game, it's just not going to be there for you later, which, again, as we said earlier, it's never too late. And everybody's got some muscle. Like, you wouldn't be moving without it. So you can build on whatever you've got, but it'll be easier and you'll have more of it. Is there research around people who were athletes and then just became sedentary and then go back to it?
Yeah. So those people, these are great questions. Those people seem to have better rebound. You know, there's this idea of muscle memory. It's thought of more as a neuromuscular connection.
Well, I was going to say it's the brain, right?
Yeah. Yes. But I am telling you from clinical experience, those people that were athletes and then became sedentary, they have a much easier time getting back and building muscle. Very much so.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. And, you know, we think of muscle as muscle, and you've mentioned this a number of times, but the neuromuscular connections, like the nerve innervation of the muscle, like those nerve pathways, I'm sure maybe they go dormant, but they don't go away. So you're just reigniting something that was already there. Yeah.
And I think that the musculature becomes, again, it just becomes primed.
Yeah.
Like efficient. Again, can you make muscle sick? Yes. But there is something to be said for if you have trained and you have been well trained, the body, it seems to remember even beyond this neuromuscular connection. I just think the tissue.
Yeah. It's just there.
You know, whether it's you reinvigorate these satellite cells or whatever.
Yeah. The body goes, yeah, I remember this. We can do this. Okay. So now we're just going to wind up now. You've said that you don't rise to your goals. You fail to your systems. So what system shifts do you believe longevity-minded adults should implement that'll pay off 10, 20, 30 years down the road?
Yeah, this is all about this idea of becoming forever strong. You know, this book is not about muscle and protein. It's about a movement. How do we develop stronger, more resilient people? And how do we have a stronger, more resilient culture? I think it is possible. And setting up a life around that. And this is where we really set standards. Are you the type of person that trains? Are you the type of person that seeks solutions versus find excuses? Are you the type of the person that gets off the plane and does something physical because you have made a commitment to do that? And, you know, movement is critical. It is non-optional. And it's under our voluntary control. It's not easy. It's a complete pain, right? I dread every Monday. So I train with my coach. His name is Carlos Mata. He's at Sigma here in Houston. I train 3 days a week. Every night, the night before, I start bitching about it. Like in my head, oh, I'm going to wake up late. Oh, I've got my kids. I can't do it. And every single morning I still go. But I know that I'm going to bitch about it because it sucks. It's inconvenient.
Yeah.
But if you choose the harder thing now, life is just a little bit easier. Yeah. But if you choose the easy path, life becomes a lot more difficult. And so, you know, training, if I had to pick training or nutrition, I would pick training any day of the week over nutrition.
Interesting.
Because, listen.
Well, yeah, you can eat well and not train. Yeah.
I mean, that is what is going to stimulate your tissue the most. And then again, you stimulate it, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. There's all kinds of things that happen. Yeah.
And I'd like to point out to the audience what you just said. Like, you are an athlete. You're a lifelong athlete, and you have a trainer. Like, you are not just wandering into the gym saying, I'm going to do bicep curls today. Pardon?
I don't even consider myself an athlete. I will say that.
Oh, you look like one.
I do have a trainer. Listen, we have very high standards in our house. You know, my husband, he's a third-year urology resident, and he was stressed because they had that in-service, and he goes, honey, I got to go run a race. And the race was like 50 hours. Oh, God. And I'm like, you've lost your mind. You're absolutely bananas. But yeah, I don't consider myself an athlete, but what I do think is that I'm not an expert trainer, right? I'm not going to know what position my neck is going to be in. I'm tired. And also it's really important. So, you know, I invest my time and my resources into a coach, which I really think that people should do. I think that it's so important. And also, I don't like training alone.
I don't either. I won't do it. Like, I mean, I can. When I was traveling recently, and the gym that I go to, they post the workouts. So while I was, you know, in a not great place, like the weights were rusted, everything was gross, I could still do the workout, right? Like I didn't love it because I had no music. There was nobody for me to play with. But I was able to get the workout in, and you just feel good. But having a trainer or doing small group training or whatever it is that's going to get you there is going to it'll pay back in spades. So let's just move into future vision to close the podcast.
Great.
If that's okay.
Yes.
So what aspect of muscle science, and I can't wait for this answer, do you believe is about to break into the mainstream medicine in the next 5 years? But most people don't even know is on the radar. Well, you may have mentioned some of it earlier.
Yeah, I think that's really it. I think that it's going to be one of a handful of things. It's going to be the use of anabolics. It's going to be better muscle testing, and it's going to be intramuscular adipose testing and really looking at the quality. And then the third thing is going to be these machines and these radio frequencies to allow for supramuscular contraction.
Yeah.
Those are the three things that I think that we're going to start to see that we desperately need. And that will change the musculature for people.
Right. If you could redesign the standard medical checkup for every adult, what assessments would become mandatory? You probably are doing it in your practice.
Yeah. Strength has to be physical capacity has to be in there. And then, you know, all the testing that we think about for metabolic syndrome is really testing for muscle health. Yeah. Because it's a metabolic component. So those are the big things. Again, really testing strength and
love it.
Muscle mass just in general.
Yeah, for sure. What's your personal North Star right now? The mission or question you are waking up every day trying to answer?
I mean, I think that it's always the same question. It's how can I be of service? Mm-hmm. And am I holding up my end of my responsibilities?
Love it. Mm-hmm. And last question. What do you hope people really hear when you say muscle is the organ of longevity? And what do you fear they might still be missing?
That's easy. Strength is a responsibility. It's not a luxury. Yeah. And it's the only organ system we have full voluntary control over. And you have to utilize it now because aging is inevitable. But how we do it collectively will determine our future.
Love it.
As a culture.
Love it. Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Lyon. This was a great conversation. Can't wait for your book, January 27th. Please let people know how they can find the book, find you, follow your work, all the things.
So you can find me on Instagram, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and our website, drgabriellelyon.com. Our medical practice is listed there. Strong Medical, my podcast. And then the book can be found on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And again, this is the book that I wish that I had. And I just hope that you guys enjoy it as much as I enjoyed putting it together. So
I think it's going to be awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time today. It was great to meet you. Bye.